Well, good morning and welcome to our weekly live video here at Concordia Technology Solutions. My name is Peter Frank. I am the Senior Manager of our CTS group here. We like to meet on a weekly basis to talk about different topics within this idea of technology and ministry. And sometimes we branch out maybe a step away into topics around communications and management. Those are kind of our overarching categories. And today we hit one that's kind of right in the intersection of both of those ideas of communication and management as we talk about the passionate volunteer and the communicator at the church. Often those who are working full-time in the church have a different perspective than those who are volunteers for very specific ministries or groups or teams within the church. And while everybody is working towards the same goal, sometimes there can be, some difference of opinions in terms of how to go about that. So my guest today is our blog author, Stacy Yates. She is, and I always double check the titles, Communication Director at Holy Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Edmond, Oklahoma. Stacy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. Thanks for writing this blog post. We'll post the link in the comments so that others can watch it. But as we were talking before we went live here, this post really hit home for me this week with some of the conversations I've had at my church of the idea of the big picture ministry and the individual groups and teams within that. So the timing was perfect for me. I'm sure it was perfect for others as well, especially as we're starting off the school year, and often that's what kicks off new things within the church too. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about this concept that you refer to as the wedge. What is the wedge between maybe a church communicator and a passionate volunteer? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think, it's kind of, when I refer to the wedge, I think it just is kind of with any communication when there's just a misunderstanding. Or you guys or people don't feel like they're on the same page. And so as humans, we sometimes create this barrier or this block, or as I called it in the blog post, a wedge, where we just immediately kind of turn off to someone, and because maybe there isn't that relationship there to be honest with each other. And so that therefore makes a wedge and makes a volunteer feel like that maybe the communicator or the person, the staff member doesn't fully understand what they're trying to do or what they're getting at. So I think it kind of goes even with personal relationships as well, when there's just this misunderstanding or this lack of building a relationship that has created a barrier or a wedge between two individuals and how they're able to communicate.
So what do you see as some of the potential problems that could arise if this wedge is not addressed, either in the immediate short term or in the long term?
Yeah, I think that in the short term, at the end of the day, the ministry is going to suffer and the mission of the church is going to suffer, because it's important that we're able to all be honest with each other and open and come to a compromise through communicating and fully understanding where people are coming from. So if we don't take the time to pause and stop and really connect and build the relationships with each other, then the wedge can grow bigger and bigger. And then as a communicator, you're not fully understanding a ministry that you're supposed to be communicating to the congregation or to your community, or you're not fully understanding an event because the volunteer that's in charge of it doesn't feel comfortable coming and talking to you. So I think your ministry as a whole could suffer by not kind of addressing it and taking a deeper look at the wedge or the problem that's going on.
Yeah, that's these relationship issues can tend to grow, and it's almost hard to realize that until it's too late. And that's why I think the solution that you proposed, building relationships, this idea seems so simple, and yet it's really easy to forget. Why do you think that is within the context of the church? Aren't we all about relationships? Why could it be such a challenge to
Yeah.
accomplish?
Yeah, we are all about relationships. And I think we're all about kind of that buzzword connecting and really trying to dig deep and getting to know each other. But I think we're humans and we sometimes try so hard to make everything perfect and to make things go a certain way. And we miss the point of connecting, for lack of a better word, or building those relationships and digging deeper and just taking a deep breath and pausing. I think sometimes we try to make things bigger than what they are, and sometimes simple is best. So I think that's why, besides just being sinful humans and forgetting, to take a break and kind of look at the other side of the coin and see what another perspective.
Good. Well, you've outlined 3 steps, and even though relationships should be easy, obviously they're not always as simple. Can you walk us through those 3 steps, and specifically with the lens of a church communicator, of how to build relationships with those volunteers who are so essential to the ministry of the church? And can you talk about those 3 steps?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the first one is be present, and I think that's the big. I mean, it's number one for a reason. It doesn't mean you have to be at everything, but try to be present when you can, and when you are present, take pictures, take interest in what the ministry is going on, and taking interest in true conversations. We have a banner ministry here at the church, and they'll be down in the room working, and it's like, oh, I should pop my head in and see what they're doing. It's 3 wonderful ladies. I think sometimes it's just 2 wonderful ladies that are just working on it. And to them, it's a huge deal. And it's a huge deal to our church. I mean, these banners hang up in the front of our church. And so being present, just that little bit of me coming by and saying hello, or, oh, what are you doing? This looks great. That means a lot for the volunteers. And maybe there's something that only meets once a month, or, just trying to pop in and making sure they know that you aren't forgetting about them. I think a lot of churches have a lot of ministries going on, and it's hard to highlight all of them, especially if they aren't, something that is going maybe with what the church as a whole is doing right now. And so your focus might be somewhere else, but it's important to be present for all of those ministries and see what they're doing and talk to them and understand what they're doing. And then the second one is listening. I think sometimes, at least I found early on, you have a plan, you have an idea, and when someone comes in, you're like, I got stuff going on. I don't have time for this. But sometimes, you just stop and listen, and they might, a volunteer might have an idea that you've never thought of, or maybe you guys can compromise on something. But truly listening and taking in their ideas and what they have. I've been brought ideas that, you would think that as a communicator, I would have thought of it, but I haven't. And a volunteer brought it to me, and it was a great idea, and it went over well. And if I would have not taken the time to listen to them and just did what I want, I would have missed something that actually was a huge hit and worked great in communicating an event at our church. And then the other is thank you. I think saying thank you means a lot. I think even saying thank you when someone corrects you. I will admit a mistake. I sent out an e-news earlier this week, and I forgot to take something out that the date was past due when it needed to be done. And someone came to me and said, hey, you can take that out now. And I told them, thank you for noticing it. I think sometimes we take things very personal, and we kind of get mad at ourselves, but telling them thank you, they're just trying to help you. So even thanking those people that maybe point out something that was an error, that shows that they're on your team and you appreciate them helping you. But also just thanking them on, when they tell you about something that's going on. I appreciate it. And thank you. Those two little words can go a long ways.
We talked about that a lot on our video and post last week. Jen Eichen was on, and she was talking about it within the context primarily of development, but also time and talents, which is exactly what you're describing. And I think it's so easy to miss. And even if you do those first two steps of being present and listening, if you miss that last step, it's going to be harder to do that in the future. It kind of puts that, kind of stops that good direction that you were having. But I want to touch on something you mentioned at the beginning of being present and just these things that go on in the church that are so easy to overlook because they're almost automatic. The volunteers who do that have been doing it for a while and continue to do it without any kind of attention or glory. And I think that's a great point to go and physically be there for some of those things, because if you're forgetting about it as a person on staff, oops, it looks like we just lost Stacy there. But for our audience, if the person on the staff is forgetting about this, it's almost guaranteed that other volunteers or ministry leaders or lay people are forgetting about that as well. And so I think that's a really excellent point about just being present for those. So when Stacy rejoins us, once her internet, there she comes. The next thing I'd like you to talk about, and you mentioned a few of these in the blog post, you've already talked about a few of them today, but some more real life or real world examples of how to bridge this gap or get away from that wedge. Can you talk about some of your success stories?
Yeah. So I touched on one. Our Braille ministry is an amazing ministry that has just kicked off. It's actually been a year. And they work in the youth room, which is kind of away from all of the church offices. And they come in every Tuesday and they just go straight in and they get to work. And so I don't see them, even though I'm here every single day. And one of the ladies sent me an email and was just like, hey, we're celebrating our 1-year anniversary. We're having cake. You should come. And it was like 10 minutes before they were cutting the cake. And I was like, okay, I gotta go. It meant a lot to me that she thought, I'm going to tell Stacy. I'm going to let her know. And to me, that I think goes back to me building a relationship with her. I've taken interest. I've been present when she's here for other things that she volunteers for. And so that meant a lot to me. We also have a school here, and one of the teachers was doing a science project. They were 5th grade and they were dissecting things. I won't go into too many details, but she stopped by and was like, hey, we're getting ready to just dissect this if you want to come take pictures. And it was last minute, but she thought to come and talk to me. And I attribute that to me having a relationship with her, that she felt comfortable to come to me last minute and talk about it and ask me to come. I feel like if I hadn't had a relationship with her, she wouldn't have felt comfortable interrupting me or felt like she was interrupting me in my work to come take pictures and have that opportunity with her class.
We often talk in church communications about the fact that it is storytelling. And great stories come from all over the place, but if they're only coming from one person, it starts to become stale. So I think that's an excellent point, that what you're describing is people asking you to help them tell the story, and that's great. Do you have any examples that you look back at now and say, if I had just done something a little bit different in that relationship, worked to build that relationship, maybe the communications could have been different? And not that we need to air all of the sad stories from the past, but anything that you might have that would be valuable to our viewers today.
I think I wish that I would have kind of recognized kind of this process, I guess, for lack of a better term, or this kind of relationship building earlier in my career at the church. I had invested it more as a member, and I had become, I built relationships as a member, but I wish that I would have started sooner and recognized the benefit of it. Obviously, I've been here for several years, and I've started to do it more. But I think if I would have done it sooner, I would have more connections in terms of relationships where people would come to me, because there are still some ministries that I don't have a contact, and they will do stuff. And luckily, I've trained our staff. So if our staff is present at something that a volunteer is doing, they'll take a picture and send it to me, or things like that. So I think for me, I wish I would have started sooner.
Okay. Well, that's a perfect stepping off point for our next thing, or what we're calling first steps. For a church communicator who really hasn't prioritized relationship building in their role, or maybe they're just starting off in their role, what would you recommend being some of the first steps, knowing that it's a time management issue of being present for everything? But what are your suggestions for that church communicator in their first steps of building relationships with volunteers?
Yeah, so I think the first step with building your relationship with your volunteers is kind of seeing what's on the calendar and seeing what is going on. And then even on a Sunday morning, I think that's a great opportunity to kind of shake hands with someone that you know is in charge of a certain ministry, but you haven't really talked to them about it. Maybe you could even say, hey, I know that your group is meeting on this day. Would it be okay if I stop by and take a few pictures? Whether or not you use those pictures right away, at least you're building your files, and you're also building those relationships. I know several ministries, like when you're taking a picture, they know you're documenting what they're doing, and what they're doing is important. And so I think the first step is just kind of looking at where you want to invest your time first. And I think on a Sunday morning is sometimes the easiest time, because you are at church, you're seeing those faces and you're putting faces with names. So if you haven't really met with someone, also maybe carve out a time in your day or your week to meet with someone. I know that we have a couple of ministries where the head leader of it is retired. So I'm able to say, hey, would you be willing to stop by my office on this day at this time, and let's chat about this ministry and maybe how we can highlight it more. They're always willing to stop by. It's just a matter of you carving out that time once a week to maybe set aside to talk to those different ministries.
I bet you, yeah, that's a great way to approach it. I can't imagine a single volunteer who would say no to someone saying, I'd love to highlight your ministry more. That's an excellent way to approach it. Well, Stacy, thank you very much for joining me today and talking about this. Like I said, it was kind of the perfect thing for me this week, as a refresher with some of the things that were going on at my church, and I know that it was a blessing to others as well. So thank you for being here. Thanks for writing the post. And for our viewers, thanks for tuning in, and I invite you to come back next week as we continue along these lines of talking about these divides, and next week it's going to be a balancing act of welcoming new visitors to your church and reaching out to them and trying to build these relationships with them without seeming creepy by the tools that we use. You might have heard the term Facebook stalking before, and that sounds worse than it is, especially when it's a church trying to welcome volunteers. But we're going to be talking with Reverend Bill Johnson, a frequent guest on our blog and with our live videos. And Bill's got some ideas on how to properly utilize technology to connect with these first-time or maybe returning visitors. So it should be a great discussion. I invite you to tune in next Thursday at 11:30 Central Time. Thanks again. Have a great rest of the day.